I remember that evening vividly. It was my parents' anniversary dinner, a day that was supposed to be filled with joy and celebration. My sister stood up to give a toast, and what she said left me speechless. She thanked our parents for raising an only child. I watched as my mother lifted her glass, and my father beamed with pride. At that moment, I felt invisible, like I didn't exist in their world. My heart ached, but I hadn't gone there to cause a scene. I wanted to make amends, to show them that I could be the bigger person, that I could rise above the past. The place was exactly what you'd expect from them. Elegant, pristine, maybe a bit too beige. It was the kind of venue where the staff whispered and the food was more about presentation than taste. I arrived 3 minutes early, but somehow still felt out of place. My sister was already there, commanding attention as usual. Her hair was perfect, makeup flawless, like she was trying to win an election or start a new age movement. She greeted me with an air kiss and that condescending tone she reserves for holidays and formal events. "You made it," she said, like I was just some random person she happened to bump into. I forced a smile, one that felt as sharp as a paper cut. My mother gave me a perfunctory hug, and my father nodded at me, the kind of nod you give when you see an acquaintance at the grocery store. They seated me at the far end of the table next to a ficus, across from my cousin's new boyfriend who couldn't remember my name, despite introducing himself twice. I didn't complain. I didn't roll my eyes or check the time. I kept reminding myself why I was there, that maybe this time things could change. I had brought a gift, something special, something I had put a lot of thought into over the past few months. It was a message, a gesture of goodwill, tucked inside an envelope that had become soft at the corners from being handled too much. It wasn't just money, it was my way of saying, despite everything, I still want to be a part of this family. As dinner began, the room filled with the hum of conversations, like an old fluorescent light buzzing overhead. My sister dominated the conversation, talking about a recent conference she presented at, and my parents hung on every word as if she were delivering a groundbreaking speech. I mentioned that I had started a new freelance project, hoping for some acknowledgement. My mother's response was a dismissive, "That's nice. Do you get health benefits with that?" By the time the soup arrived, I had answered exactly 2 questions, neither of which were about me. Then came the moment of the toast. My sister stood up, lifted her glass, and smiled that perfect smile of hers. She thanked everyone for coming to celebrate our parents, who had raised her into the woman she was today. The room erupted in applause. I clapped too, like I was on autopilot, a trained seal doing tricks on command. Then she turned to our parents with that same carefully curated warmth and thanked them for raising an only child. Silence followed. I waited, hoping someone would laugh, that my mother would gasp and correct her, or that my father would at least cough or clear his throat. But nothing happened. My mother raised her glass, and my father smiled that same posed smile he wore in holiday photos. It was as if I was invisible, like I could burst into flames right there, and the only response would be someone asking the waiter to refill their glass. The noise in the room faded, not in a dramatic way, but with a dull stillness, like I was finally in on a joke that had been playing out for years. Without realizing it, I stood up, reached into my bag, and pulled out the envelope. I walked to the center of the room, my voice steady and calm, ready to finally speak my truth. I remember that evening, as if it were yesterday. My heart was pounding, but my mind was clear. I had finally reached a point where I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay. I needed to do something that would finally express what was inside me all these years. I stood up and announced that I had something to give to the people who raised me, but I knew there had been a misunderstanding. The room fell into a wave of confusion. My sister's expression went blank, and my mother looked like she was struggling to find the right words, but couldn't quite manage it. I turned my gaze to the back of the room where my aunt and uncle sat. They weren't the center of attention, more like they were there because they had to be. They looked shocked, My aunt's hand moved to her chest, and my uncle seemed unsure whether to stand or disappear. I walked over to them and handed them the envelope. No big speech, no drama, just a simple, "This is for you." I sat down again, and the silence that followed was overwhelming. It was as if a bomb had been dropped, but hadn't fully gone off yet. My sister blinked repeatedly, trying to process it all. My mom tilted her head, probably trying to convince herself that she hadn't just witnessed something inconvenient. My dad's expression was unreadable, but his jaw was tightly clenched. My aunt was staring at the envelope like it was something dangerous. I didn't say anything more, and no one asked any questions. The rest of the dinner was wrapped in that strange, suffocating quiet. It was like the moment had sucked all the air out of the room, and no one knew how to breathe again. But for the first time that night, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for validation, not for permission, not even to be noticed. They had raised me as if I was an only child, so I decided to give what I had to someone who truly saw me. People often say that when someone shows you who they are, you should believe them. I used to think that was just a quote people like to share on social media, stuck between pictures of minimalist living rooms and avocado toast. But maybe Maya Angelou knew something I didn't, because my parents have been showing me who they are since I was old enough to understand what a golden child was. And more importantly, that I wasn't it. The signs were always there, subtle at first. Like how my sister's macaroni art would proudly adorn the fridge, while mine quietly became a makeshift grocery list. Or how they'd cheer loudly when she sang off key in a school play, but stayed silent when I won a regional writing competition. I remember bringing home a little trophy once, and the way my dad glanced at it before saying, spelling bees don't count as sports. When I was 8, I asked for a bike. My sister got a shiny pink one with streamers, a matching helmet, and training wheels. I got a long lecture about being grateful for hand-me-downs. The bike I received was from a neighbor's kid. It still had mud on it, and yet I kept trying. Maybe if I was quieter, easier to manage, more helpful, they'd make room for me. So I babysat, cleaned the kitchen without being asked, and brought home straight A's. My mom mostly called them the bare minimum. When my sister got a B+ in history, there was cake. When I graduated high school, they forgot to book a restaurant. We ended up at a fast food place because, as my dad said, the fries were better anyway. For my sister's graduation, they rented a private hall. There was a slideshow, speeches, even party favors with her name on them. You'd think she was giving a TED Talk, not just picking up a diploma, but I told myself I didn't need all that. I convinced myself I was fine with keeping my head down, not realizing that I was shrinking a little more each day. My aunt and uncle were the first to notice. They weren't loud about it, didn't try to be my saviors, but they were there in all the small, quiet ways that mattered. They used to babysit me when my parents needed a break. I think I was 5 when they first picked me up, and my mom handed me off like I was an item she was happy to unload. When I was a kid, my parents would drop me off at my aunt and uncle's place with a quick reminder not to let me stay up too late. They treated me like I was part of their world, not just a guest or an obligation. I remember the way they made popcorn and let me choose the movies we'd watch together. There was a moment during the never-ending story when I got really scared, and my aunt just held my hand, reassuring me that he was just pretending to be scary. It was the first time someone explained fear in a way that actually made sense to me. Another memory sticks out. I spilled orange juice on their white carpet. I was terrified of the reaction based on what I was used to at home, where even a smaller mistake could lead to yelling. But my aunt just handed me a towel and said, "It's just a carpet, you're worth more than that." It was a revelation, really, because at home my worth always felt tied to what I did or didn't do, what I achieved or failed to achieve. In college, I got really sick once and couldn't afford to buy cold medicine. I didn't expect anything from anyone, but my uncle showed up after driving 2 hours just to bring me soup and cough drops. My dad's response was a thumbs-up emoji after my mom suggested he should say something. It was like a punchline to a joke that wasn't funny. I remember trying herbal tea when I got my first job. I was terrified I wouldn't make it, that I'd somehow fail spectacularly. My aunt sent me emails every day for a week, simple messages like, "You've got this," "They're lucky to have you," and "Proud of you already." Meanwhile, my parents only seemed interested in whether the job came with dental insurance. My aunt and uncle were there for every birthday, every emergency, and all the little moments in between. When I finally got out of a toxic relationship and had nowhere to go, they didn't hesitate to clear out the guest room for me. I remember my mom telling me I should have tried harder to make it work. When I landed my dream freelance client, they were the first people I wanted to tell, not because I didn't want to tell my parents, but because I already knew how that conversation would go. I was tired of feeling like I had to shrink myself to fit into their expectations. I tried explaining all this to my mom once. I told her how much it hurt growing up in the shadow of someone who never seemed to have to try as hard as I did. She just laughed it off, calling me overly sensitive, and added that at least they hadn't spoiled me. She was right about that, but that wasn't what mattered. My aunt and uncle hadn't spoiled me either. What they did was see me, listen to me, and give me space to exist without having to earn it. In a family where everything seemed to be about performance, that was revolutionary. A few weeks before their anniversary dinner, I found myself sitting at their kitchen table sipping coffee. It dawned on me that I felt more at home there than I ever did in the house where I grew up. My uncle was telling some goofy story about setting off the smoke alarm while trying to make pancakes. My aunt rolled her eyes but couldn't help but smile. Their dynamic was effortless, the kind that comes naturally when you love someone without feeling the need to change them. I half joked, half confessed that I used to wish I was theirs. My aunt looked at me and simply said, "But you are." That moment carved a permanent space in my heart. As I walked into the anniversary dinner, I had no intention of making any speeches. I didn't plan to do anything special, really. I had an envelope in my bag, and in my mind it was still meant for my parents. Some small part of me was holding on to the hope that they might surprise me, that they might finally see me. But instead, they erased me. Softly, publicly. For the first time, I allowed myself to accept what I'd always known. It wasn't that I hadn't been seen because I failed to shine, but because they refused to look. So I turned my focus elsewhere. What I'd been searching for all along, I found it in the family I chose. The envelope remained unopened. I knew because the next morning I received a text from my aunt. Just a single question mark. No words, no emojis, just that small symbol of confusion that somehow spoke volumes. I waited an hour before calling them back. They answered with the speakerphone on. I could hear my aunt's breath before she spoke, telling me they hadn't opened it yet. I smiled, even though they couldn't see it. I told them they could open it. My uncle hesitated, asking if I was sure, assuring me they didn't want to cross any boundaries. But they never had. They opened it together, and I listened to the rustle of paper, followed by silence. No gasp, no exclamations, just a silence that made my chest feel light. I had transferred $50,000 into a joint account in both their names, with no strings attached. I remember the day vividly, the day when everything seemed to shift. It was a quiet evening, one of those moments where you feel the weight of the world just sitting on your shoulders. And I knew it was time. I sat there, staring at the piece of paper in my hands, my heart pounding in my chest. It was a simple act, really, just a gesture. Something I felt I had to do, not for show, not for any kind of recognition, but because I owed it to them. My aunt and uncle had been there for me in ways I couldn't put into words, ways that were never measured by grand gestures or loud declarations. Their kindness was subtle, almost invisible to the outside world, but to me, it was everything. It was like they saw me when no one else did, and that mattered more than anything else. So I decided to repay them in the only way I knew how. I thought it would be straightforward. I imagined their reactions, maybe a few tears, a hug, and that would be it. But when I handed them the envelope, there was a moment of silence, a pause that hung in the air like a question. My aunt's voice broke that silence with a tremble I hadn't expected. Her disbelief was palpable, and I could see the confusion in her eyes. They didn't understand why I was doing this. They felt they hadn't done anything to deserve it, but in my heart, I knew they had. They'd been there. They'd shown love. They'd seen me for who I was. That was more than enough. My uncle's voice joined in, soft and almost sacred, as if he was speaking a truth he'd never dared to say out loud. They didn't know what it meant to me, but I did. That's why I did it. I thought it would end there, a clean finish, a simple act of gratitude. But life is never that simple, especially in my family. The aftermath was like a storm I wasn't prepared for. A few hours later, my phone was buzzing incessantly. The first call was from my mother. I let it ring. The second one came with a voicemail. I played it while doing chores, her voice sharp and accusing. She thought it was a joke, a stunt. She was angry, and I could hear it in every word. My sister called next. I ignored her too. Then the texts started coming in, questions and accusations wrapped in disbelief. My sister wanted to know if it was real, if I had really planned to give them that much money. She couldn't understand why it wasn't going to them, to our family. She thought I was being dramatic, that I'd embarrassed them all. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was too busy laughing, not out of amusement, but at the absurdity of it all. They didn't see what I saw. By evening, my dad had entered the fray. He rarely texted, but this time he did. His message was clipped, demanding a face-to-face conversation. I could read between the lines. He was trying to figure out how to handle this, how to control the narrative. What followed was a whirlwind of family politics. My parents rallied, trying to spin the story in their favor. I received messages from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, all curious about the drama that had unfolded. I didn't engage. I didn't feel the need to defend myself or explain my actions. I let them stew in their confusion, the silence more powerful than any words I could have said. Then came the unexpected visit. 2 days later, in the afternoon, my parents showed up at my door. My mother was composed. My dad seemed ready for a confrontation. I didn't invite them in. I leaned against the doorframe, waiting to hear what they had to say. My mother asked to come inside, but I refused. My dad tried to reason with me, saying we needed to talk. But I wasn't interested in their version of talking, not after the way they'd treated me at the dinner. My mother tried to downplay it, saying it had all been a joke, but I knew better. There was no humor in their toast to their only child, a toast that had cut deeper than they realized. I crossed my arms, reminding them of their silence that night. They claimed I'd blindsided them, but the irony wasn't lost on me. They'd done the same to me, time and time again, with a smile on their faces. My dad brought up the money, the $50,000 I'd intended to give to my aunt and uncle. He couldn't believe it, couldn't understand why I'd made that choice. My mom's voice tightened, listing all the ways that money could have benefited them. I was aware, painfully so. That's why I'd saved it all those years. But something changed in me after that dinner. When they toasted to me, it felt hollow, like they were toasting to someone they didn't really know. It wasn't revenge I sought. It was recognition. I wanted to acknowledge the people who had truly seen me, who had been there without asking for anything in return. That was the real reason behind my decision, and no amount of family drama could change that. Sitting here, staring into this camera, it's like I'm talking to a friend who doesn't judge, who just listens. And right now, I need that kind of friend. I want to tell you about something that happened in my life, something that's been eating away at me. It's about my family, about choices, and about what it means to stand up for yourself even when it feels like you're tearing everything apart. I had to make a decision, a big one, about money. It was supposed to go to the people who truly deserved it, the ones who were there for me when it mattered. But in doing so, I feel like I threw my family away. It's ironic, isn't it? They always said family comes first, but I had to choose. I chose my heart. I chose my sanity. and it felt like I was finally choosing a family, a real family. After I made that decision, my parents left. It wasn't with a dramatic slam of the door, but a quiet click that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. It was a silence that screamed louder than any argument. I thought that might be the end of it, but then my sister jumped in. She did what she does best. She posted something online, something vague, something that twisted the knife a little deeper. It was a picture of our parents' wedding, and she captioned it with something like, "Some people only come around when they want applause. Real family shows up quietly." It was like she was throwing shade at me without even mentioning my name. I didn't respond. I didn't see the point. The next day, my aunt called me. She sounded embarrassed, awkward. She told me they were getting messages from my mom and sister. They were trying to guilt them, saying they manipulated me, but they didn't. I knew that, and she knew that. She said, "We didn't want to be in the middle." I reassured her, told her she wasn't, that she was exactly where she's always been, right beside me. She went quiet for a moment, then said something that hit me hard. They weren't going to cash the money. They didn't need it. But I insisted. I needed them to take it because it was something I could do to make things fair, to say thank you properly. She got emotional, her voice breaking. She said I was going to make her cry, and I said, "Good." I needed to know I wasn't the only one feeling like this. That night, I sat on my porch with a glass of wine, looking up at the stars. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I felt sick, like something inside of me had been pushed back into place. The fallout wasn't over, I knew that. But I wasn't scared of it, because when everything settled, my aunt and uncle would still be there. They were the ones who never asked for proof, who didn't need me to perform for them, who knew who I was even when I didn't. And now they knew how much they meant to me. I thought maybe, just maybe, the silence would be the end of it. You know that moment after a storm when everything is still and you convince yourself it's over? That was me, sitting in the quiet, hoping that maybe my parents would take the loss and retreat into their own little bubble. But that's not how they operate. Silence wasn't peace, it was just the calm before the next storm. I remember the moment I realized something had to change. It was a conversation with my aunt, who has always been the one person in my family who tells it straight. She doesn't sugarcoat, doesn't play games. When she said she was hurt, I knew she meant it not as a weapon, but as a truth I needed to hear. It was hard to face, but I believed her because she has this way of being painfully honest, unlike the rest of the family who prefer to dance around the truth or hide behind facades. So I decided to drive over to her place. I sat there at their kitchen table, a box of pastries in front of me, feeling this heavy knot in my stomach. I apologized, genuinely, for everything, for anything that might have made her doubt how much she means to me. There were no grand speeches, no emotional outbursts. Just my aunt reaching across the table to hold my hand, and my uncle quietly pouring coffee. It was such a simple moment, but that's what real love looks like, uncomplicated. No need for justifications or explanations. That was when it all became clear to me. I realized I had to stop forcing something that was never going to work. It was time to stop trying to patch up a broken ship that was never going to sail, to stop calling it family just because we shared the same blood. So I sat down and wrote a letter. It wasn't angry, it wasn't a rant, it was simply the truth, a clear list of boundaries. I asked them not to contact me again, not to try to reach me through others, not to twist the story, and not to expect reconciliation. I wished them peace, but I was done with the role they cast me in. I printed it out and mailed it, wanting to make sure there was no way they could say they hadn't seen it. A week later, my mother called from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. Her message started with tears and ended in accusations. She said I had destroyed the family, broken my father's heart. She asked if I was proud of myself, and as I listened, I thought, yes, I am. But they didn't stop there. They tried to pressure my aunt and uncle, even going so far as to send official letters, implying they were being manipulated, suggesting I was unstable. Things got so intense that my uncle had to consult a lawyer just to make sure they were protected. I offered to help cover the costs, but he declined, saying they don't take from family, though they would accept gifts. That winter, I spent the holidays with them, just the three of us. No expectations, no performances. We cooked together, played cards, watched old movies in our pajamas, and laughed about nothing in particular. My aunt gave me a scarf she had knitted herself. My uncle made hot chocolate, burned it a little, but we drank it anyway. It was the best Christmas I'd ever had. At one point, my aunt looked at me and asked if I regretted it. I didn't even need to think about my answer. No, because I didn't just walk away from a family, I walked toward one. I stopped hoping to be noticed by those who never really saw me and instead chose the people who did. Eventually, the call stopped. The noise died down. They moved on, found new people to perform for, fresh narratives to spin. I didn't. I stayed in this small, quiet life where love isn't conditional and kindness doesn't come with strings attached. Sometimes I still think back to that dinner, to my sister's face when I handed the envelope to someone else, to my mother's stunned expression, to the tension in my father's jaw. Those images used to haunt me, but now they just remind me of the night I stopped apologizing for simply existing. The night I finally said enough and meant it. Sometimes I do wonder if I handled it the right way. Not the part about giving the money to my aunt and uncle. That still feels absolutely right deep down. But the moment itself, the delivery, the public declaration, leaving them in silence. Was it too much or maybe not enough? I didn't do it to shame anyone. I did it because I couldn't keep pretending anymore. But there are nights I lie awake wondering, should I have waited? Should I have passed the envelope in private? Would that have softened the impact or just made it easier for them to rewrite the story? So, what do you think? Did I do the right thing? Was I justified? Or was there a better way to step away? Let me know in the comments. I'd truly love to hear what you would have done in my place. And if you want more true, honest stories like this about family decisions and standing your ground, don't forget to hit subscribe.